everyday saint, Mother Teresa once said, "When a poor person dies of hunger, it has not happened because God did not take care of him or her. It has happened because neither you nor I wanted to give that person what he or she needed." One person who is definitely doing something about helping those in the world who need us the most is the founder and inspiration behind the charity we are all supporting today. I would like to introduce and invite our good friend, Baydala, to come and say a few words about UN poverty.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Thanks, David. It's a real pleasure for me to spend some time with you guys here today. I don't have much time, so I'm going to dive right into it. As Greg said, I'm the founder and executive director of UN Poverty, an online charity that helps you give online gift cards to the people that you love, and then what they do is take those gift cards and invest them in projects on the UN site, and all of those projects are focused on ending extreme poverty in the poorest countries around our world. And the cool part, for me anyway, about UN Poverty is that you can then watch the world change online with videos and photos and emails from the projects that you've chosen to invest in. Now, I didn't start in charity. I had no idea that international development was actually a thing. I started out as a corporate IT project manager, and I did that for about 13 years before I ended up making a big change. And I was a pretty typical, what I would consider a pretty typical North American. Life to me was about family, about friends, about going out to restaurants and having some fun, about nice clothes, about a good job, about vehicles, and about property. And I found myself in between my contracts traveling around the world to escape the rat race. And increasingly, as I would travel in between my contracts, I found myself drawn to the developing world. And there was something about the communities and the people in the developing world that was really attractive. There was this energy, this vitality, and this beauty. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I later came to know it as what is human connection. That was the beauty. And if anyone here's traveled to the developing world, which I'm sure many of you have, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I can remember along that journey the exact moment that I woke up to the world around me. I can remember in one moment being in Pokhara, Nepal, and with my North American eyes, looking at this group of young kids playing, just like North American kids would play. And then in the next moment, the illusion fell away before me, and I could clearly see the poverty in which these kids were in. I noticed all of a sudden that they were wearing paper-thin t-shirts with tons of holes in them, if they were lucky enough to have a t-shirt. Those were the lucky ones. So I woke up to this poverty all around me, and I started to see everything different, and especially contrasted with my life of opulence back in Calgary. Well, as I woke up, I realized I needed to learn. I wanted to know more about what was going on in this world around me. No one had ever told me this was going on. So I started to read. I started to talk to people about what was going on. I started to watch movies. I started to watch documentaries. And I started to travel. I traveled to nations and communities in the developing world so I could actually see the work going on and talk to people about what reality was, how we got there, and how we might find a way out. On that journey, I learned a lot of things. I learned that in our world today, there's 130 million school-aged kids that can't go to school, and about 70% of them are girls. I learned about this thing called the bottom billion. There's about 1 billion people on our planet that have no access to light when the sun goes down. About 1 billion people that have no access to a meal every day. About 1 billion people that can't read or write, and about 1 billion people that don't have access to clean water and sanitation. So what I learned was that our world was broken. And I know that there's a lot of different definitions about what poverty is and the causes, etc. But the United Nations has a definition of extreme poverty. People living on under $1.25 a day are considered extremely poor. And that's not some random number they pulled out of a hat or pulled out of the air. What that number means is that under $1.25 a day, people don't have enough to survive. They don't have enough to pay for the food and shelter and clothing and water and medicine that they need to live. They're actually dying every day from fully preventable causes just because they don't have enough cash. So that's the world we live in. And 24,000 people every day, 24,000 people die every day after day after day from poverty. For me, numbers, I can't really connect with numbers that well. They seem so impersonal, especially when I come into a place like this with heart-filled people. So grant me this one indulgence, if you would. Take a look at the people next to you. Look them in the eye. Even just for a split second, connect with the people next to you. And connect with the people behind you and in front of you. Just for a second, look someone in the eye. Now imagine this whole room filled up 10 times every day, people dying from poverty. That's how many people die every day from extreme poverty just because they don't have enough cash. And it can all be stopped. We could fix that all. Now, if you're like me, when you hear these facts, you can be tempted to go to the place of guilt. Like, oh my God, I feel so guilty and I feel so ashamed that I'm letting this happen in my world. But that's not the point. I'm sharing these facts with you because that is what's happening in our world. Please don't go to the guilt place because it does not help anyone. I'm convinced that we can only change what is if we look directly at what is. And that is our world. And we can only change it if we look directly at it. So 2 more facts that changed something dramatic for me. In one 24-hour period in my life, on this journey, I learned 2 things. The World Bank, the CBC ran some radio program that said that the World Bank was estimating that about $50 billion a year for about 15 to 20 years would be enough to get the poorest people out of poverty in a lasting way forever. 50 billion. Wow. Shortly after, on the same day, I heard that in North America alone, we spend over $1,000 billion on retail and wholesale during the holiday season every year. 50 billion, 1,000 billion. 5% of what we spend during the holiday season in North America would be enough to get the poorest people out of poverty in a lasting way. Wow, that was amazing for me to learn. That was what I needed to trigger my decision to make a change, to actually make a difference. I was sold. I was sold. I was in. I wanted to find some way to participate in ending extreme poverty. I wanted to put my life energy behind doing something about this challenge of our time. So I looked for an organization to get involved with that was doing this kind of work. Now, I'm not from the charity space. I'm a corporate IT project manager. I have no idea about charity. I had no idea what to expect. But I knew what I wanted to see, and I looked for a year for an organization that I could put my energy, my human energy towards to help address this problem. And I know that there's a lot of great organizations out there doing a lot of magnificent work in this world, but I couldn't find what I expected. I couldn't find an organization that was doing it in the way that I believed. What I did find was what I call big bucket, black box philanthropy. You throw your money in a big bucket, and then it turns into a black box, and you don't really know what happened to it. You don't know what projects get funded or not, how much went to overhead, and then maybe something happened at the other end, but you don't ever get informed of that. It was so disheartening to find that out. What I found out was not only was the world broken, but charity was broken too. So I did the most natural next thing. I decided to sell everything that I own to start a nonprofit organization in the way that I could buy into and believe, in the way that I thought it needed to be done. Now, as I went deeper down the rabbit hole of learning what was going on regarding extreme poverty, I learned that there's this thing called a poverty trap. And we've probably had experiences in our own personal lives around this as well. But what a poverty trap is a self-reinforcing system that keeps people in poverty. A quick example for you to grab onto. Imagine someone living in that bottom billion community that I discussed. Not a lot of food around, dirty water if they have any water, no jobs to be had, no real economy. So this person's slugging it out, trying to find a job to make a few dollars, but they're not getting a meal a day, and they're putting this polluted water into their bodies. Because they're not getting enough food, their immune system starts to deplete, and eventually they find themselves sick in bed. So now they're ill, lying in bed, and even if an opportunity came around the community for them to make a few dollars to get some food, they can't take advantage of it because they're lying in bed ill. They get poorer, they get sicker, and that's how the story goes. That's the poverty trap. Now, that personalized or individualized example can be applied to communities and to nations as well. We see that at work, keeping nations and communities in poverty for a sustained period of time. So life is pretty complex. Life is pretty chaotic sometimes, especially when I consider my life. It can be pretty chaotic. How do I say that? Life is a chaotic system and a complex system. And what does chaos theory tell us? Chaos theory tells us that there really is no A plus B equals C in a complex system. There's no predetermined outcomes or for sure outcomes. But what you can do, the best you can do, is actually influence that system in a particular place and help it move in a certain direction. That's the best we can hope for in a complex system. And it's amazing to me how the smallest influence at the right point in a system can have dramatic results. You guys have probably all heard of the butterfly effect. A butterfly flapping its wings in Japan can cause an earthquake in Toronto. That's the thing we're talking about here. And I like to envision those small points of influence in complex systems as little fires. I think they're little fires being lit around the world. So, although life is super complex, this is the paradox, which life is also super simple. And when the basics of life exist, real life, not just surviving, but real life, can flourish. And I've seen both of those principles at work. In a small village outside of Kisumu, Kenya, around 2003, I was lucky enough to travel there. A year and a half before I arrived, it was a pretty typical bottom billion community. So what does that look like? I've pretty much described it already. Not a lot of jobs, not a lot of food, malnourished kids everywhere with signs of malnourishment, the hair turning light brown and falling out, and distended bellies. And if people were lucky enough to have a seed to throw in the ground to grow, the parched earth would barely give anything back because they didn't know how to grow and there weren't any supports for that. So when I think about that complex system, with a little help, they decided to influence that complex system in a very simple way. They decided to light one little fire in that community. What they did was they addressed their issue around food security, around having enough to eat. So two really simple things. They learned how to do a little bit of spot fertilizing as opposed to fertilizing everything. And they learned how to do a bit of creative watering techniques. And what this resulted in was 10 times the amount of food coming from their crops in one growing season. 10 times. Wow, talk about life-changing. Talk about influencing the system in the right place. So now they've got 10 times the food. What do? First thing they do is put that into a barn and store it up as a community. So now they've got a large amount of grain to sell. And so instead of selling it to the first people that come along out of desperation for a low price when supply is so high, they wait for off-season and sell to commercial buyers. And they get a much better price for their grain. So now they've got a little bit of money, a little bit to work with. So what do? They invest in a few businesses. They start growing some mushrooms and selling them. They start growing groundnuts, and they start making some crafts and selling all this in the market nearby in Kisumu. So they're on the way. They also chose to invest in a water well in the center of their town, so they're getting fresh, clean water. And they're not spending their valuable calories walking 5 kilometers to get dirty water to put into their bodies. Now they can spend those valuable calories doing more productive work. And they also decided, and this is my favorite part, they decided to start a school feeding program. This is amazing. They decided that every child in their community would get 1 meal every day through a school feeding program. Now, the impact of this was amazing, unbelievable. So now instead of sitting in a desk and worrying about the hunger in your belly distracting you, they were actually able to focus on their studies. The result? Previous to me getting there, their school was ranked 156th out of 189 schools in the region. After 1 year of this school feeding program, they were ranked number 4 in the entire region, just because they could spend time at school and focus on their studies. Now, the next thing they did was build pit latrines in that community. It sounds like a simple thing, but again, dramatic results. What pit latrines meant at the school is that now pubescent girls didn't have to miss 4 to 5 days every month and stay home, but they could actually stay at school for the entire time and not fall behind their male counterparts. They'd usually end up dropping out. But now they could stay and continue their education. Now talk about pride and energy and self-respect welling up in this community. That gave them more energy to make more change and continue to grow. That's what we call the virtuous cycle, another self-reinforcing cycle, but a cycle upwards. So you might say, that's great. That's one community. But what about the 999,000 other people on the planet that live on under $1.25 a day? What about the other 3 billion people that live on under $2.50 a day? What about them? Well, that is just one fire. But imagine with me, hundreds of thousands of these little fires being ignited around the world. Hundreds of thousands of little projects like that in nations around the world. That's amazing. Now next, not just those hundreds of thousands of fires, but what about the hundreds of thousands of fires within us here, when we realize that we can actually be agents of change in this world, when we can actually do something to impact the world and make it a better place. And today, we have more help than ever before to make those changes. We're living in a culture of expectancy and hope and change. We see this in the youth culture all around the world, sweeping the world. We see Occupy, we see the Arab Spring. We see young people expecting change just by acting, just by being in this world. So we've got a culture of change and hope, but we've also got technology helping us. On the web, we've got tools that help us do real things in the world. I can go and design my own car, have it manufactured, and have it delivered to me. I can do that with tools on the web, but we also have almost omnipresent communication at our fingertips. When I look around, we have smartphones, internet, Facebook, Twitter. We're all connected, so we are able to communicate with each other. Now, both of those things come together to allow us to accelerate the change, and you're seeing the signs of this change everywhere as industries are reshaped, like Napster and iTunes and Spotify are reshaping the music industry. You're seeing new business models emerge, like Tom's Shoes. I go buy a pair of Tom's shoes, and the next thing they do is give me my shoes, but send a pair to the developing world to someone that needs them. New business models. We're also seeing education and information set free, with MIT giving their entire course curriculum away for free online to anyone that wants to learn. And we're also seeing dictators overthrown, nations reshaped in the Arab Spring. So the signs are there. The tools are here with us today. We actually can change the world right now. We no longer have to wait for governments or corporations or the wealthy to do it. We can do it ourselves. And in fact, we are. The World Bank released a report in July 2011 that stated that 28 of the 63 poorest countries in the world have moved out of poverty in a lasting way since the year 2000. That's amazing. We're doing it. We're changing the world. Now, we're meeting here today to talk about navigating this new world and the different dimensions of it. And in the charity space in particular, we're seeing a new model emerge. What are the hallmarks of that new model? Online, 100%. 100% goes to the charity or the project that you choose, and people get their overheads separately or explicitly. Small amounts from many people, as opposed to large checks from just a few. Choice. You get to choose where to put your funds. You get to invest in the world change that you want to see. Proof of impact. Emails and videos and photos coming from the field to show you the impact of your decision to invest in something that's world changing. And the foundation of all this is built on the foundation of hope and creation, not flies on eyes, guilt-based motivation. That won't get us anywhere. But it's actually built on a message of hope and creation. And organizations like You End Poverty, Kiva, and Charity Water are leading the way in providing people the tools to engage in the world and change the world in a way that they want to see. And if I get the trends right, Gerald Clemente will tell me if I got the trends right, I see the charity industry eventually becoming irrelevant. That's my hope, to be out of a job. Because as we become increasingly interconnected through technology and culture, as we continue to move together and join together in this connected global world, do we really call it charity when we buy our son a meal? Do we call it charity when we drive our mom to the hospital when she needs it? Do we call it charity when I give my baby a 22-cent pill so they don't die from malaria? We don't call that charity, we just call that life. So I hope soon I'm out of a job, so if you hear me knocking, please give me 5 minutes of your time. Speaking of time, before I leave the stage, I want to give us a chance to have a gift. I want to give us all a gift. I actually want to create the possibility for a gift. And what is that gift? The gift of actually connecting with each other in a real way here today. If you're like me, connecting in the mind is really easy. It's a nice concept, but actually experiencing a connection with people is rare. Experiencing a connection with the broader world is rare. So what's happened is the SEED event organizers, Greg Mather and such, have chosen a UN poverty project that they support. It's an eco-stove project in Uganda, and I'll tell you more about it if you want to hear. I know I've got to go. But what I propose is if you wish to participate, that you'd go and find a UN table and throw a couple of bucks, small amounts, into one of those dispensers or put it online. The key here for me is that it's a small amount because I want you to not even notice that it's gone, and I want you to notice how big of an impact we can make in this world from something that we didn't even notice. By doing that, we'll be connected to each other and starting a little fire around the world, but we'll also be starting a fire halfway around the world in Uganda and affecting 5,000 people's lives there. So, on that, I'm going to close, but before I go, I want to share the great innovator and world changer Henry Ford's words with you. Whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. Thank you.